summary of June 12 is this: friendship, betrayal of trust, and revenge.
Changing the clock doesn't guarantee justice. Only stronger institutions do. I'm Oluwayemi Adelako, and this is Big Story on Daybreak Live. Today, we confront a bold and deeply consequential question: changing the election calendar, reform, necessity, or distraction. The National Assembly now wants to shift presidential and governorship elections from the usual February-March to November 2026, under a proposed requirement that all legal disputes be settled before inauguration. The proposed compressing tribunal timelines: 90 days at first instance, 60 days at appellate, 60 days at the Supreme Court, all within 185 days before May 29. Supporters say this is the answer to post-swearing litigation mayhem, but critics warn push election dates closer and governance gets hollowed out, campaigns swallow state action. The ADC warns it could turn Nigeria into perpetual election season, shortening effective governance. Is this a real reform to strengthen democracy, or a power play dressed in technocratic language? My guest this morning is Ignatius Eboselume Ofino, a researcher and public affairs analyst. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Oluyemi.
Yeah.
Adelakun.
Yeah, correct.
There is one thing I like to call you. I love calling you Yimi.
Oh, wow.
So there is one thing I will say this morning.
Okay.
That my best wish for you is this: to be one of the greatest presenter in the world. Amen. With the highest endorsement deal.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's go back in history a little bit. Since 1959, down to 2023, there's never been a time when election has been moved backward. We've only seen cases where elections have been moved forward, maybe due to insecurity or finance and the likes. But this time, the Senate is proposing that, okay, can we have this election in November 2026 rather than the normal February-March 2027 that is expected, to happen. So some persons are saying, okay, this will help us to, put an end to all the court cases, the litigations, the petitions before the swearing in, which is May 27. But some others are saying, whether we move the election backward or not, it might not still solve all this case in the court, because in 2007, when we had the issue of Peter Obi and INEC, before it was later settled, there was even an issue with the court, even Amechi in 2007. So I want to ask you this morning, Ignatius, are you a supporter of this, this thing that INEC is talking about, that election should be moved to November rather than the normal February-March?
Jimmy, thank you for having me this morning.
You're welcome.
History has a way of repeating itself.
Okay.
First, as a tragedy, and secondly, as a farce. But when you're talking about election in Nigeria, it usually ends in tragic farce. Now, you are talking about a laudable idea. There ought not to be what we call court litigation after any election that is being held. But we actually have a credible election in Nigeria. That has been the bone of concern. So we have seen a lot of court litigation, and this court litigation has become a source of distraction in public governance. It is not possible for anyone or an individual to govern a group of men except those group of men decide to surrender their willpower to that man to govern them in principle and in practice. And when you're talking about election is a means to an end. It's a process whereby the people decide to elect those who is going to govern them. Because there's what you must know about man. Man wants to govern and be governed. It's one of the natural instincts in us as human beings. We want to govern, and we also want to be governed. Okay. And now we are talking about the electoral process. I remember when you go back from the trajectory of the narrative, President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, GCFR of blessed memory, attended an international conference, and he boldly admitted that the election that brought him into power was flawed. It was a sense of courage. So now he now decided that there must be what we call electoral reform. That was what led to the emergence of Justice Uwe's Electoral Reform Commission. So in that process, what did they identify? The first thing they identified was this. There was what we call electoral fraud.
Okay.
Ballot snatching, ballot stuffing, multiple thumb printing. It was there. A lot of things was happening there. There was also what we call electoral violence in the process. They now said, what can we actually do in order to enhance the electoral process in Nigeria? So they now decided to say, let us go by the way of technology. That was what led to the issue of card reader. When they introduced card reader, they now discovered that card reader was not even efficient. That was what led to the introduction of what we call BVAS. Bimodal Voters Accreditation System. Then we had what we call IREF. And that IREF simply means what? INEC Result Viewing Portal. So they introduced technology. At the end of the day, what still happened? The election was still not being adjudged to be credible. If election is free, fair, and credible, the loser will accept defeat in good faith without even challenging the result.
But there was a time that the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, congratulated President Muhammadu Buhari after the election.
Because he knew that that election was somehow free and fair. And Jonathan was saying, my ambition is not worth the blood of any Nigerian. That was what he said. He was a man of peace, a lover of peace. That was why he was able to win that peace prize. He won it. So let us be honest to ourselves. Do we have credible election in this country? Because there was no credible election. That is why you see people going to court to seek for redress. So it has always been altering the electoral cycle in Nigeria. Now we are having what we call off-cycle election. Up to 6 or 7 states in Nigeria today, they don't even conduct election at the same time with others. Let me give you an example. Imo, Anambra, Ekiti, Ondo, Edo. It's there. Off-cycle election. Election is supposed to be uniform when we are talking about general election in this country. But because there was a lot of electoral malpractices.
Violence too.
Violence was there too. Ballot snatching, ballot stuffing, it was there. So that was what led to this issue of court litigation. That was what the cause. That was the cause. Now we're having what we call vote buying. Do you know that there's one thing this man said? Professor Joash Onjo Amupiton,
the new INEC chair.
Yes, he said he's going to ensure that result is being determined at the poll, not in court. That's a laudable idea. It's a laudable aspiration. But good intention is not enough. There must be implementation. So the politicians too in Nigeria, there's one thing I've discovered about our politicians in Nigeria. All of them have that natural tendency to rig election because they are desperate for power.
Okay. Ovino, are you seeing sense in this new amendment? Because the Senate is saying we want to amend the 2022 Act. And then under that, we have something that is called, okay, any presiding officer that fails to announce result electronically and physically will have to do jail or pay an amount. What do you make of that? At the end of the day, we can have election in November rather than March or February. Can it solve all of this?
Whether problems? The election is being conducted in November, February or March, if the election is not credible, there is bound to be court litigation. There is one thing that is so unique about the American democracy. You know, they practice what we call electoral college. There is the popular vote. We have general election. Then after there is what we call college, the electoral college, where people will decide, those who control the electoral system in America. You can win at the popular vote and lose at the electoral college. It is the electoral college that determines who emerge as what? As the American president. So now when we are talking about our own case, is different from the American. Now there is one thing you must also know about the American too. There is what we call in their electoral year. There is what we call Super Tuesday. Every first Tuesday in November during the electoral year, that is when election is being held in America. And there is what we call diaspora voting too. In America, diaspora voting. Americans that are living outside the shores of America will also vote. But in Nigeria, there is nothing like diaspora voting. So there has been agitation for diaspora voting. But here now, it's a laudable idea that electoral issues or disputes should be settled before inauguration. Post-election or post-inauguration litigation is a source of distraction. It affects public governance. That is true. The governor will be distracted. The incumbent president will also be distracted. We have seen cases in Nigeria today that those who are adjudged to win the election, at the end of the day, in court, the mandate was taken away from them and given to the rightful person who won the election. So there is always justice in court. Sometimes elections are being rigged in this country. Let me give you the electoral rigging in this country in mathematics.
Okay.
You know mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2. But in the case of Nigeria, when it comes to issue of political rigging, 1 + 1 = 11. 11 + 11 = 111. 111 + 111 = 1,111. 1,111 plus 1,111 equals to 11,111. 11,111 plus 11,111 equals to 111,111. 111,111 plus 111,111 equals to what? 1,111,111. That is the type of rigging in Nigeria. When we are talking about rigging has been the problem. Do you know that when you are going for court litigation, you are going to spend a lot of money? You are going there to spend a lot of money. The defendant will spend money. The prosecutor will also spend money. But what about the issue of burden of proof? The burden of proof have always been what? The ballot paper.
It has been shifted to INEC now.
Yes, the burden of proof. So INEC now need what we call forensic expert. So the issue there is that election results should be determined at the poll, not in court. So I'm in support with that laudable idea that Professor Ojo Amupiton is trying to assure the public.
Okay.
Yes, that this time around is going, but there is a litmus test for him in November. Election is going to be held in Anambra. That will be a test run for him.
Okay, apart from the Anambra election, do you think INEC as a whole is ready? Should this election be conducted November next year? Looking at the fact that he's new to the office. And of course, he has to do a lot of things, talk about finance, talk about getting to know all of the things that he needs to do. Do you think INEC as a body is ready for general elections come next year?
Change is inevitable.
Okay.
Change is the only thing that is constant.
Okay.
So if that will make us to have a credible election, so be it. America will conduct election in November. The next January, there will be inauguration. So now, when we are talking about post-inauguration litigation, it has been a source of distraction in this country. So we want to put an end to it. So when we are talking that before inauguration, all court cases might will have been resolved. I think it's a laudable idea.
How sure are we that all court cases will be resolved before May 27, 2027?
No, it's the judiciary.
How independent is the judiciary? Let's start from there.
I wouldn't know.
Okay.
So sometimes I ask myself that the Nigerian judicial system, is it a model in Africa, let alone before the rest of the world? So the justice system in Nigeria must be adjudged to be just. We need incorruptible judges, not political judges, not corrupt judges. Some of our judges in Nigeria today, they are biased. Judges are supposed to be neutral. They are supposed to be voters, not partisan judges. We have partisan judges in Nigeria. So there is a timeline. Let me give an example. If you want to organize any program, The resources to sponsor that program must be certain. The date of the program must be certain. If you are inviting a guest, there must be public assurance that the guest will come. Everything you are going to do must be certain. That is what the American has done. But in Nigeria today, do you know that election has been postponed a week? There was one time in Nigeria, in this country, presidential election was supposed to be held in a particular Saturday. The voters were already at the polling unit. They were already there, waiting. The next thing we had, that the election has been postponed till the next Saturday. It has happened in this country twice. Twice!
And we've seen some
And
government
when you look at it,
elections.
it's as a result of conspiracy on the part of the ruling government. Because they always have that instinct to rig election in this country. So when we are talking about popularity and acceptability, the popular will of the people has been always subverted. There have been what we call subjugation. So when we are, you know, the other time I made mention that sovereignty belongs to the people. The government is just a custodian of the people's sovereignty, so that the society does not become lawless. That is why we have a government. And the only way to have a government is through what? General election. So it's a process. But look at what is happening in Nigeria today. All political parties have that tendency to be elected into power desperately. So that is the problem we're having in Nigeria. We can say, let us give it a trial in November 2026. And let's see what is going to
Well, are you not looking at the political risk that might come up? Because, I mean, I just spoke about, INEC now. What about the electorate themselves? Because we talk about this definition, democracy is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. If that definition still stands in Nigeria, how ready are the electorate to say we want to vote? I mean, for our preferred candidate.
The voter apathy is there. Whose fault? It's not even the fault of the government.
So whose fault?
It's not even the fault of the politician. It's the fault of the people.
In what sense?
If politicians and their friends are voting, election will continue to be rigged, and the masses will continue to complain. So it's the fault of the masses.
But the masses are not so happy with what is going on in the country.
No, if you are not happy with government economic policy, you vote them out of power. And the only way to vote them out of power is through election. We don't need a military government anymore in this country. I am against military rule in this country. And military rule, we don't want it again in this country. And when we are talking about bad governance in any civilian regime, the only way to vote them out is through what? Election.
Okay, Ofino, according to G.A. Almond and S. Vaba, he said political culture is the pattern of beliefs, ideas, and orientation of a political system towards politics. It talks about how the people see their politicians and the political parties. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, now, a lot of persons have lost interest in anything that has to do with politics. How do we return that interest? Because it is that time that we can begin to talk about people coming out to vote.
Those who have lost interest,
yes.
If the oppressors keep oppressing them, they have no excuse to give. Because during election, they have given you opportunity to make the right choice. How will I continue to vote for someone who is oppressing my life? Someone who have decided to mortgage my life and destiny. I must be a rational thinker. As a rational thinker, you vote your oppressor out of power. So it's the fault of the masses, not the fault of the government, not the fault of the political class. It has been the fault of the masses who refuse to liberate themselves from the siege of oppression.
But this is not the first time. There was a time that Nigerians were very eager to vote, but then maybe they were disappointed about INEC or about the security operators, vote buying, ballot snatching, and the like. So should we not even talk about reforms in the INEC security operators before blaming the electorate?
Let me give you an example. The government, or let me use the word, the oppressors, know that if they rig the election, the people will not revolt. INEC also know if they manipulate the election, the people will not revolt. That has been the problem in this country. If INEC know that if the people's will is being subverted, the people will revolt. INEC dare not manipulate the election. If the ruling government knows that if the election is being rigged and manipulated, the people will revolt. The ruling government dare not rig the election. So the problem has always been the people, not even the government. The people should be blamed more, who refuse to cast their vote. Probably they are frustrated.
What about the 1993 election of that was considered free and fair, not just in Nigeria but outside of Nigeria? People came out en masse to vote. They voted across ethnic lines. They didn't care whether you're a Muslim or a Christian. They voted, but then what happened to that election?
Let me give you an example. The people's mandate was subverted. And the people reacted. But there's one thing that we see on this platform when you are talking about June 12th. Chief MKO Abiola of blessed memory and General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, they were two jolly good friends. So the summary of June 12 is this: friendship, betrayal of trust, and revenge. That's something that we not see on this platform. I repeat again, the summary of June 12 is the story that surrounds what? Friendship, betrayal of trust, and revenge. So when we are talking about popular revolt, it's there. It's a way of expressing your dissatisfaction. If your right is being subjugated, you are fighting for justice. But look at what is happening in Nigeria today. The people are so gullible. The people are fearful. They are complacent. So that has been the problem. Do you know that the politicians themselves, they represent the microcosm of the society? The people are more in number. INEC registered 91 million voters in 2023. At the end of the day, the total vote cast was what? 24 million. What happened to the rest 67 million?
Political apathy.
Political. Do they have any excuse to give? Now, the incumbent president now introduced a harsh economic policy affecting every one of us. So those 67 million people have nothing to complain about. They shouldn't complain. Because assuming they have voted in 2023, probably they would have made the difference. So that is why I keep saying that the masses are more to blame than the politicians. There's what we call intellectual revolution. And the only way to go by it is through what? Voting.
Speaking of intellectual, or maybe intellect now, I think majority of those who voted in the 2023 presidential elections were elderly people. What happened to the youth? And this youth that we are talking about, they are learned, they read books, they go to the library, they write research. But what happened to them? Because they know what is happening. So how can we work on that? Because it's not just about blaming the people now. What are the people seeing that is not, giving them that courage to say, I want to come out to vote?
Voting is one of your civic responsibility as a citizen. So any citizen that failed to cast his or her vote has already violated the law of the country.
All right, Afino, let's talk about this now. The ADC, shortly after the Senate, dropped this proposition to say, let's have election in November. The ADC and some other opposition parties are saying, if this should happen, if elections are conducted in November 2026, it might affect governance. What do I mean by that? They are saying some governors who are supposed to cater to some certain things might not be so bothered, might be so focused on election. For instance, now we have some governors that are trying to contest for re-election. Some will be out of office after 2027, but some governors, they want to contest again. Even the incumbent president is going to contest again. We have governors also across the state, across the nations. What will happen to governance? Because a lot of them will be so focused about, I want to get back into the office, rather than work on certain things that they promised the people.
The observation that ADC made, to me, those are flimsy excuses.
Really?
Weak excuses. We are talking about credible election. Let me give an example. There is institutional failure in Nigeria. There is difference between public governance and politics. In politics, anything can occur in politics. Propaganda is part of politics. The conspiracy theory is part of politics. But when you are talking about public governance, you are talking about service delivery to the people. Look at what the Americans have done. One, there is the defense policy that has been institutionalized. The healthcare policy has been institutionalized. Transportation policy institutionalized. Educational policy institutionalized. So irrespective of any political party, even the foreign policy has been institutionalized. Irrespective of any political party that wins election, you have to follow the trend. Because there is also what we call institutional system already in place. It's already in place. So what we are having in this country is what we call institutional failure. What we are using for campaign, you cannot use it to campaign in advanced democracy. That I'm going to provide good road for you. No! It's the right of the people to have what we call good road network. It's the right of the people to have what we call healthcare, quality healthcare delivery system. It's the right of the people to have what we call quality educational services. It's the right of the people to have what we call good transportation scheme.
Okay.
So you don't use it to campaign. So what we have in this country is what I call third world democracy. And the people, they are not willing to change. They are not willing. Will you be using infrastructural development for campaign in America? No. What the Americans want is this. How do you ensure that America remain the most powerful country in the world? 1. 2, American foreign policy must never be compromised. 3, to ensure that the American dollar remains the only currency that is being used in international trade.
So don't you think Americans will not be bothered about infrastructure, light, security? Because all of those things are
And
available.
institutionalized.
But we don't have them in Nigeria.
That is what the ADC is supposed to say. That we are going to ensure that everything that we need in this country that happen to be the basic needs become institutionalized, irrespective of any political party that wins the election. So if we are saying it is November, let it be November and nobody changes it. If we say that there must never be any form of court litigation after inauguration of a government, so be it.
So what if the court cases, we are unable to settle all of those court cases before May?
There is a timeline.
What happens?
There is a timeline.
Okay, 185 days.
Yes, before inauguration.
Okay.
So anything beyond that will never be admitted
Do you
in
know
law.
you have seen cases whereby in this same country, court cases dragged for almost 2 years?
Then there was nothing like timeline.
Okay.
Here there is going to be a timeline. So time frame is going to be there. So when the time frame is there, it's just like when Atiku when Atiku decided to bring his case concerning Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the Chicago academic saga that happened.
Okay.
He came with evidence. But that evidence was not admissible any longer. Do you know why?
Okay.
Because of it lapsed. It lapsed. So there is a time frame. So that time frame says that court litigation must end within 185 days before inauguration.
This is Nigeria. We've seen cases whereby laws like that were put in place, but then it didn't work at the end of the day.
Why? It's the fault of the government.
Not the judiciary this time. The government.
It's the fault of the government.
Okay.
The government must enforce the law. The judiciary is to interpret the law. That this is what the law says.
Okay. Ofino, part of the proposal, this one says, the proposed amendment also introduced early voting, allowing certain categories of Nigerians, such as security personnel, INEC officials, accredited journalists, observers, and ad hoc staff, to vote up to 14 days before the election day. What do you make of that?
I do not agree with that.
Why?
I do not agree with that.
Why?
I do not agree with that.
Okay.
You know, when we are talking about security forces, which of the security forces? When you are talking about security forces, you talk about the Nigerian Army, the Nigerian Police Force, you talk about the Nigerian Air Force, you talk about the Nigerian Navy too, and like a paramilitary organization. They are supposed to be neutral. You be neutral.
They don't need to vote. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they don't need to vote. You bear true allegiance to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and you must be absolutely loyal to any government in place. So that is why I disagree. You must not allow army to vote. Their children can vote. Their wife can vote. Not military officers. No.
Okay.
They must be neutral.
Okay. Away from that, let's also talk about this. I have this one that says, on the 28th of August, the House of Representatives also proposed that all 5 major elections in 2027 be conducted by INEC in one single day in a sweeping reform outlined in the proposed Electoral Act 2025. But the ADC, has noted the proposal by the National Assembly to amend the Constitution in order to hold the general elections. They are saying, okay, this is not a good one. What do you make of it? Conducting all the elections in one day. Do we have the capacity?
Let me tell you, off-cycle election and staggered election in this country came as a result of series of court litigation. Okay. Because you have to go to the court to seek for what? Justice. So there is a lot of what we call electoral alteration and it's a problem. Some people are thinking, how can we find a way so that we now realign together? It's going to be difficult for us to have a uniform election in this country anymore for now. But the truth remains is that credible election, whether you conduct it the same time or not, let the election be adjudged to be credible, to the extent that the loser will accept defeat in good faith without even bothering to seek for court litigation anymore that have lost. That is, I'm advocating for what we call credible election. When there is no credible election, there is bound to be court litigation, and there is bound to be what we call obstacle elections or staggered election. But the truth there is this: those in INEC, are they actually incorruptible? How many of them are patriotic? How many of them love this country? How many of them love democracy? Is INEC truly independent?
Even apart from INEC now, the last election, we saw some professors who were part of the rigging process. So professors...
That is the conspiracy of the elite against the Nigerian state. So that is why when ASU is complaining today, I see what I know is ASU APC. They should stop complaining. Do the needful. Do you know what it means for you to steal the people's mandate? Stealing the people's mandate. That is the height of injustice. The people voted for Party A, and at the end of the day, you now decide to rig the election result, and give it to Party B. That is the height of injustice.
So, Ofino, because of time, before we go, you are saying that elections should not be conducted in one single day, all the election, governorship and presidential, because there was a time in this country, many times, that some governorship elections ended in inconclusive, just one state.
INEC it was a conspiracy on the part of INEC and those in power. The power play. It was a power play. It's just like the game of chess. There is one thing you must also understand. If we want to have free and fair election in this country, that will reflect the popular will of the people. Local government elections should be conducted first. By INEC, not by SIEC, not by State Independent Electoral Commission. Local government elections should be conducted first, because local government is closer to the people. So when you now conduct local government election first, then you can now go ahead to conduct what we call governorship election, then again, Senate, election to the Senate, and House of Representatives. Then the last election should be what? The presidency.
Ofino, thank you so much for being a part of the program.
Thank you for having me.
In 1 minute, what are some of the things that should be put in place to ensure? Because you seem to be a supporter of these elections should be conducted in November rather than February, March. What are some of the things that should be put in place to ensure?
What I'm saying is this: whether it is conducted in November or February or March, the election should be credible, free and fair. Let's think of the next general election, making maximum impact and shaping the future. Because politicians determine your political destiny as citizens. Then why should you not allow someone who have decided to oppress you, someone who has decided to mortgage your life and destiny, to continue to remain in power? The only way to vote out such a person is through election. Voter apathy is not an excuse.
Thank you so much. You either fix the rules or live in chaos, but not both. We've seen that calendar proposal carries surface appeal. No more litigations dragging past handovers. But without deep parallel reform of the courts, INEC, political parties, and just like Ofino mentioned, the electors themselves, without checks on incumbency, the change risk being symbolic, disruptive, and dangerous. If we accept shifting the electoral calendar, we must demand ironclad guarantees, constitutional safeguards, full judicial independence, and funding for speed, fairness, and transparency. So the public, stay alert. Don't let constitutional tinkering become executive engineering. A big thanks to Ignatius Bosalime Athena, being a part of this program. And to you at home, keep asking, keep pushing, and don't let reform become a cover for convenience. Until next time, I come your way on Big Story. I'm Oluwayemi Adelakwa. I'm saying good morning.